we'll discuss the career development and leadership pipeline. There is a mistake in the both, but as you know, we have three distinguished experts in these areas. I fully understand that you are anxious to hear about their insightful presentation instead of my introduction. So I'll make a very brief introductions. First speaker is Dr. William Ross. He's a professor of human resource development at Penn State University, and also president of the consulting firm called Roswell and Associates. And he's a well-known author of best-selling books called Effective Success Planning and Career Planning and Succession Management. These books are already translated into Korean, so you may buy from the bookstores. Today he will discuss the importance of the balancing career development and success planning. Second speaker is Dr. Patricia Borrell. She is a professor of educational leadership and organization learning and department in the University of New Mexico. Her area of experts are individual, team, and organization learning. In this session, she will discuss the challenges and key issues and approaches to the succession planning. In addition to that, she will emphasize the importance of mentoring and coaching for successful succession planning. Last speaker is Dr. Mary Fontaine. She is a global managing director of leadership and talent line for Hay Group, and also a general manager of McLean Centers for Innovation and Research and Innovation in Persons. Her expert areas are CEO successions, leadership transformations, and top team development. Her main clients are IBM, PepsiCo, Pfizer, and other Fortune 500 companies. Today, she will share the result of the new groundbreaking empirical research done by the McLean Centers. As you already know, we only have like 80 minutes, so we have to divide each presentation. Gonna be spend about 20 minutes for the presentations. After that, we are going to have a question and answer session. So if you have any question, please hold the question until all the speakers finish the speeches. So let's give a big welcome to the first speaker, Ms. Roswell.
I'm delighted to be here. This is only my third visit to Korea, but I spend a lot of time in this region. For example, I've been to China 48 times. I've been to Singapore 19 times, and many of the other countries in the region. I have currently 6 doctoral students studying with me at Penn State who are Korean. So I thought you would find that interesting. I have only 20 minutes to talk with you about career development and the leadership pipeline. And rather than stand behind the podium, I prefer to come out with the audience. I'm a little more comfortable with that. Sometimes, I will warn you, I sometimes like to ask people questions as we go through the talk. So, I just have to learn how to use this. Yep. Let's go. Here we go. All right, let's start with an informal poll. It's after lunch, and many of you may be sleepy, so I need to have a way to start to get you back. So let me ask you a question. How many of your organizations have successfully implemented a career planning and management program? You already have one. Nobody. Raise their hand anyway. How many of you have successfully integrated your career planning and development program with your succession planning and talent management program? Nobody in the room. You're You're either sleepy or you don't have it. How many of you have tried to implement a career plan program? Okay, hey, we got some people for that. Okay, good number. How many of you have tried unsuccessfully to implement a career planning program? Nobody wants to admit that. How many of you have no clue what I'm talking about? Okay, see that 2 or 3 of you said yes. Okay, that's good. Introduction, well, we know that succession planning is very often covered from the top down. Senior leaders of a company will decide who the future talent will be for different positions in an organization. But career planning is basically bottom up. The individual thinks about what they want to do in the future. Some people don't have plans for the future, but I maintain that the people who do have plans beat those who don't have them every time. So that's the purpose of what I want to talk about, and I have only 20 minutes to do things like define career development, explain how career development relates to building the leadership pipeline, describe some of the essential relationships between career planning and succession planning, and review some key issues to address in any career program. So, as they mentioned, several of my books have been translated into Korean. One of the translated book covers is right there in the center. And the book on the right, Effective Succession Planning, was recently translated, but I have not yet received a copy. So I can't show you what that looks like. The session organization, we're in the introduction. I'm going to spend a moment talking about key terms, defining what those are, give you a model for how to integrate career planning and talent management, and then talk a bit about challenges for the future. So let's start with some of the key terms. And it's easy in some of the terms we use to get confused. We hear these terms used, and they're sometimes almost used interchangeably. But these terms actually do have different meanings. When we talk about career planning, that's what you do. That's what individuals do. But when we talk about career development, we're integrating what the individual wants to do and the needs of the organization. When we talk about career management, the focus is on what the company does to identify the relationships between jobs. So what are the qualifications needed to be promoted, for example? Minimum and desirable. Succession planning is the process of developing talent for the future. Of course, a lot of people get confused about the difference between succession planning and talent management. And I have written about both. And I always tell people the key difference is that succession planning emphasizes development, developing people for the future. But talent management focuses on at least 3 things: attracting the best talent, developing the best talent, and retaining the best talent. So the overlap occurs in the development component. Succession planning is about development, and 1/3 of talent management is about development. So, career programs, why would we need them? And I've talked to corporate leaders, and they will say things like, we don't want a career program because we don't want to encourage people at a time of downsizing to believe that they will have a career in our organizations. They may not. We may disappoint them by building expectations that we cannot deliver on. So consequently, in the 1990s, many famous companies that had career programs abolished them. But let me tell you, they are making a comeback. And they're coming back for a couple of reasons. One reason is career programs can be a retention and recruitment strategy. Some young people want to hear what your company will do to develop their talent before they agree to go to work for your company. In fact, in China, where I've been many times, I was talking to Dell China, and the leaders there told me that 50% of their turnover is because employees say the company is not properly developing them for the future. So development can be a recruitment advantage, it can be a retention advantage, and if we can help people become more productive, it can be a productivity advantage. So career programs give that organization a competitive advantage in recruiting talent. It gives the organization a framework for understanding how people development will occur. It helps retention, and it helps individuals at a time when we already know from the financial crisis that one of the things that will happen is many companies will experience a downsizing effort. And one of my questions is, if you were fired tomorrow, would you be prepared? Career agility. Are you agile like a cat? You throw a cat in the air and 8 out of 10 times it lands on its feet. If we fired you tomorrow, would you be able to find a job immediately? Because you would be so agile in your ability to deal with the labor market. If your answer is no, then you probably have not been devoting enough personal attention to career development. I often say to professional managers, how can you manage anything if you can't start by managing your own career? So managing yourself is the key issue. Some of the drivers for career planning and career development, we know that many people change employers. I looked for Korean statistics and I couldn't find them, but in the U.S., we know the statistics show that workers between the age of 18 and 38 change jobs an average of 10 times. That's a lot of times. People are searching for what their future will be. They're looking for a match between company culture and themselves. And so career planning can help sort that out. Here are 5 common reasons why, and this comes from some recent research, 5 common reasons why people quit their companies. So these have to do with retention problems. The first one is that corporate culture is not comfortable. The number one reason why people quit is not for pay, but it's because of stress. They are stressed with their boss. They are stressed with their coworkers. They are stressed with their customers. They're stressed because they don't know what to do for sure. And so discomfort is the number one reason. Workers do not feel that they would be missed. If I leave, no one will care. And so it's that lack of engagement problem. Workers don't feel that they are supported to get their jobs done. The manager is not a helper, but is more of a hindrance to performance. Workers don't see an opportunity for advancement. They don't know how you get ahead in the organization. And the pay, rewards, and recognition just don't seem to match up to the work performed or the stress that workers experience. So, you know, the old joke in the States is the reward for hard work is not a promotion or more money. It is more hard work. So we give you more to do. So let's talk a little bit about how to integrate career planning with talent management. In this section, I'm going to give you a pretty model, and it'll take me a couple of minutes to talk through the model. Someone has to help me with time. This is my model that comes out of my book, Effective Succession Planning. And this model can be used for both career planning and for succession planning, or to integrate the two. This model is very complicated, and I don't have time to go through it all. But each box on this model represents many things that a company or a person would need to do. So the first step is making the commitment. That means you decide to do it. You commit to a talent program. You commit to career development. Second step, you assess present work and people requirements. What are the competencies that are needed? What are the competencies you possess now? Evaluate current performance. For a company, that has to do with your performance management system. Are you grading people against the work requirements and the competencies required at their current level? Only if they pass that step do they go on and are considered for promotion. Because you can't fail at your current job and still be considered a viable candidate for promotion. If we promote you and you're failing in your current job, that just destroys the credibility of the promotion system. Step 4, we have to decide who to recruit. Based on the talent we already have that we know based on our performance management, where are the gaps? What kind of talent are we missing? What kind of competencies don't exist in the organization? So we go out and find them. Step 5, align the people requirements and the competencies with the strategic objectives of the business. Where are we trying to take the business? What kind of people will we need in the future if our strategic objectives are realized? That's what that step is about. Step 6 is, to me, the heart of the whole thing. What does it take to determine whether someone is promotable? You know, a lot of people would like a promotion just because they would like a better pay and a nicer job title. But potential assessment means that promotions are not a reward for doing your current job well. It's a business decision based on your ability to perform at a level higher than where you currently are. And how do we know you can perform effectively if we have never seen you do it? How do you know you can perform effectively in your boss's job if you have never had to do it? That's what that particular step is about. Only 40% of U.S. companies make any kind of effort to objectively assess potential, to determine if someone is promotable, given the requirements of the job at the next level up. The other 60% of the companies assume that if you can do your current job well, you are guaranteed to do your boss's job well. And we know that can be a fallacy. It leads to the Peter Principle. Step 7, close developmental gaps. How do we find the way to build your capacity, build your competencies, so that you are promotable? A lot of people think that would require sending you to a training program. Training can be useful, but 90% of development occurs on the job. Based on the kind of people you work with, the kind of work assignments you were given, the kind of feedback you get from your boss and your peers, from many different, what we might call informal learning experiences. It comes from experience, and we can plan for that. Step 8, decide who to retain. A systematic retention program. My research shows most companies don't have a systematic retention program. It is weak. And of course, from an individual standpoint, that is the decision whether to stay in your organization or leave. What are your prospects for the future? Are you learning what you need to develop as a person? So we can use this model either for individuals or for organization talent programs. And the last step, very hot topic, evaluate the program. Are we getting our money's worth? One of my Korean doctoral students finished her PhD. She came to me and said, I don't know what to study. And I said, well, I will give you a topic if you don't know what you want to study. She said, really? What do you suggest? I said, find out what CEOs think about the way they evaluate their talent programs. So she did that with Korean companies. And she had 15-minute interviews with CEOs of very large Korean companies. It was quite interesting. They were willing to give her the 15 minutes. And you know what she found out? Her findings matched my what I was expecting, which is the CEO said they didn't care about return on investment. What they cared about was when a vacancy occurred at a senior level that they have a lot of good choices to select from, and it wouldn't take very long to fill the position. So evaluation may have to do with how long it takes and what quality of people we get. Okay, I must be about running out of my time here. I did have a tool which I'll be happy to send you, but before I end, a few key challenges for the future. I predict, because of the financial crisis, that we will have a talent crisis globally. It won't happen this year and it won't happen next year. But when the recovery occurs, what will happen is many companies have downsized. And many of their senior leaders who are baby boomers are holding off their retirements because their pension plans are invested in stocks. And when the stock market starts to get better, they will be burned out and they will cash in their retirement funds and retire, maybe all at once. If that happens, the dam breaks and the talent war goes from being a war to an immediate battle of all sectors and all organizations fighting against each other. Thank you very much. I have no idea how long I spent, but something like 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping your time. Next is Dr. Roborik, and she's giving us a real case study. Let's give her the big one.
I'm very honored to be here speaking to you today. It's my first time in Korea, and I'm delighted to be here. I've been in leadership development for over 20 years now. I started developing student leaders, and at the present time I'm developing executives. And I've done most everything in between. And also part of my work is that I've developed mentoring programs of all different kinds. Mentoring programs for new employees, mentoring programs just for all employees, and leadership mentoring programs. I've done a lot of thinking about what it takes to go from a manager to a leader. And I've been doing this over a number of years now. I think that managers need skills in understanding people and processes and procedures, but leaders need something else. That there is a jump that happens there that they need to do in order to truly lead. And I think part of that is that they need to know, one, themselves, and two, they need to be able to provide vision to others so that they can truly lead them. So they're no longer just supervising people, they are taking them someplace else. So I thought, I've been thinking about what is it that does that? And part of my background, I'm a psychologist, and I've done counseling work and clinical work. And in that work, you develop people, you help people get through barriers that they've had, you help them to change, truly change. I also, at the university that I am at, teach courses in how people learn, how adults learn particularly. And more specifically, I also teach doctoral seminars on transformational learning. And transformational learning, I'll explain in a little bit, is truly an adult learning theory, and it's a theory whereby people actually change their perceptions about the world. So today, I'm going to talk to you about a mentoring program that I developed that utilized transformational learning and mentoring in this program. I came to the point in time where I thought, how do I use transformational learning to help develop leaders in a way that could be operational in organizations? And several years ago, I went to a leadership conference in Copenhagen. And there I met a person by the name of Paul Rogers. And he was presenting, and I'm going to show you the study that he presented on. This was a study done by the Society for Human Resource Management. It was done in 2002. This was a study on how do global companies prepare their leaders. And so you can see here that of these global companies, 57% use some kind of external programs. 51% use internal programs, 48% stretch assignments, and so on, all the way down to where 22% of them use mentoring. When I heard the gentleman from Novartis this morning, he went through this exact, idea of what these people do. However, he went one step further. What Paul Rogers did is he took the top 20 companies and he was looking at what do the top 20 global companies use for leadership development, not just all of them, but the top ones. So what he found is that 91% of those organizations have early identification of leaders. They are looking at those high potentials early on. As soon as they come in, they are looking for potential. Then they put them through formal mentoring programs, just as the gentleman this morning talked about, formal and informal programs. But that they do exactly the opposite of what the other companies do. The other companies had mentoring programs at the bottom. That was the last thing they did, or fewer people used them. These top 20 companies all used, 91% of them used, or 82% of them used formal mentoring programs. And then the 73% of these top companies used coaching. So you can see where they put their emphasis on individual development of their leaders. So I want to talk to you today about a case study that I've been working on. I was asked to develop a succession planning program for a large medical system in the United States. They have many hospitals, they have many clinics and doctor's offices. They have a health care plan, they have a foundation. They're quite large in the southwest part of the United States. And they asked me at a very critical time, right when I got back from this conference in Copenhagen, where I started thinking about you could do transformational learning. You could use this in a mentoring program. Usually it's used in counseling programs, certainly, but this would be operational if you could use it in a mentoring situation. When I got back, all of a sudden I was presented with the opportunity to go in and do a succession planning program for this medical system. When I talked to them, I said I'd be willing to do this, I would love to do this, but I really wanted to incorporate transformational learning into the system, and they gave me the go-ahead to do this. And so I'm going to present to you that program and how it was set up. This was for a large care facility. They have acute care hospitals, long-term care facilities, medical clinics, health plan, as I said. It's in the southwestern United States. I started this program in 2005, and I was the consultant that was brought in to develop the program, and then I also have been working with the program on and off, and to do some evaluation too. The program objectives were to accelerate the development of high potential leaders. It was to provide those high potential leaders with a comprehensive, in-depth feedback so that they would better understand their abilities, their strengths, and their development needs. It was to increase the executive bench strength of these organizations and increase the organization's awareness of who are their top talent. And it was to foster leadership diversity. This organization had as is sometimes typical in organizations in the United States, not a whole lot of diversity at the top level of the organization. And and then to align succession management with the overall business strategies of the entire medical system. The program was designed to address 4 different risks. The first was vacancy risk, the risk of critical leadership positions being vacant. This is a critical, problem that we've just talked about. I think that I just heard a percentage of about 5 to 8 million management and leaders just in the United States will be retiring over the next 5 years. Now with this new economic situation, they may put it off a little bit, but we're going to have the same situation there where they're just going to all of a sudden walk out of their jobs and there will be this war for talent. The second risk that they were looking at was the readiness risk, the risk of having undeveloped successors. They didn't want to walk into the situation where they just had to promote someone because they have a vacancy. They wanted that person to be prepared for that vacancy. A transition risk. This is the risk of poor assimilation of their talent in the organization into the organization. That they wanted to make sure that that transition was smooth and that it was easily assimilated into the organization. And then the fourth one was a portfolio risk. And that's the risk of a poor deployment of talent against the business goals. You could develop someone who could have high talent, but they didn't fit with the organizational goals. And so they wanted to be able to mesh the two. They wanted to develop people who actually could lead this organization, believed in the organization, and carry it forward. So let me just talk a minute about what transformational learning theory is. It's a theory, it's based on some of the, I'm not going to go into these theories down here, but of true change in someone. You can learn something and it can just store information in you. You can be trained on skills. But transformational learning looks at how to change your perspective. It's learning, and I define transformational mentoring, it's learning within a relationship, which is mentoring. That's a definition for mentoring. But I was using the concepts of transformational learning to help people change and develop. So I was going to build this into this program. Transformational learning is a dramatic, fundamental change in the way we see ourselves and the world. I would imagine that every single person in this room has gone through transformational learning. If you've been ill, having a serious illness, if you were in a near car wreck, if you've seen the birth of a child, there are a million different situations that can cause you to go, oh my gosh, I see the world differently now. And this is what transformational learning basically boils down to. It shapes people. They are different afterwards. And just the same way a counselor works with a client to bring them along so that they learn to understand themselves and shape them so that they go out a healthy individual. This is what transformational learning does. It transforms our frames of reference into ones that are more inclusive. We all have assumptions that are what are called tacit assumptions. They're assumptions that we don't even know we have. We got them growing up from our parents, our society, our neighborhood, our schools, our teachers, our families. And we don't even know why we think that way. We just accept it. We've never even thought about it. In transformational learning, what you do is you have the individual examine those assumptions so that they can understand, well, do I really believe this or don't I? And very often, you think the same way, but you are more aware of yourself in this process. How does it occur? The first thing you have is some kind of a disorienting dilemma. Like I said before, if you're in a near car wreck, that's a disorienting dilemma. You think, oh my gosh, I almost died. And so you see the world a little bit differently afterwards. For mentoring, I was building these disorienting dilemmas into the mentoring program so that these individuals were being forced to go to question why they were thinking the way they were thinking. From that disorienting dilemma, then, you start to question your assumptions. Why did I think that way? Why did I assume that the world would always be the way I thought it would be? From that point, you start to validate how you really think, how the world is now to you that you've been through this. And then you have what is called perspective transformation. Your perspectives about the world are now different, or they're cemented in deeper so that you truly understand yourself. Why use this? Because incremental learning, which is like training or education, which is one step at a time, doesn't solve our problems. It solves some problems, but there are huge problems that organizations have. And as leaders of organizations, they need to be able to think even greater. So incremental learning is not going to do it. In transformational learning, you can make leaps and bounds with individuals so that they see the world in a different way. If we keep learning the way we've always learned, we stay the same. Einstein said something to this effect. And so this is teaching people how to learn in a different way. And if you need change that actually transforms people, work, society, whatever, you need to give them tools to do this. There's a definition of mentoring, of why we should use mentoring. It is generally agreed that mentoring is one of the most intense and powerful one-on-one relationships that entails the most influence, identification, and emotional involvement. Using mentoring, you can really help someone change. And so this is why I wanted to put this mentoring into this succession planning program, and in that mentoring embed transformational learning. The program, this is talking a little bit about the whole program, had formal training, first of all, of both mentors and the mentees. They went through training that I had developed on understanding the mentoring process, and for the mentors, training on how to help people discover and examine their assumptions about life, and so on. It had mentoring, which was the major component of this program. It also had job rotation assignments for these early identified leaders that were in this succession planning program. I also built in a team project so that they could work together, so they weren't just being mentored individually, but together the mentees, the protégés, would learn how to have skills of working in a team to create something new. And their team project was to somehow create a project that would take this medical care system to a different level. So it really challenged them to think differently and work very closely together. There were feedback systems. I was a mentor to the mentees, and then there was a mentor to the protégés as well, or someone that they could go to within the organization to talk to if they were having trouble. They also had a lot of on-the-job experiences. We would put them in different areas, like the job rotations. We would give them in-basket assignments and various other experiences so that they would learn how to do it. If they were doctors, let's say, they went and worked in the insurance area so that they would understand that portion of the medical system. And then we critically developed that leader-follower, the mentor-mentee relationship. And I did a lot of work with them on how to form those relationships, make them strong. We did a lot of that work at the beginning so that the mentoring could go on. This was an 18-month program. It's now in its second reiteration of this, so it's the second time it's gone through. Some more components of the program. The very top executives of the organization, the CFO, the CEO, the heads of the major hospitals, these were the people that served as mentors. And they all agreed to go through the training and learn how to do this. Mentees were identified, either self-identified or nominated by their managers. Again, I told you we had mentor-mentee training. We went through a systematic pair matching where we did some instruments, personality instruments, learning instruments to properly match people together. I developed program materials, readings, tools, various questionnaires, things that they could use as they went through the mentoring. We also had all group meetings where we would all get together, all the mentors and all the mentees, to talk about the process. Like I said, we had coaching for both the mentors and the mentees. And then we built in both formative and summative evaluation into the program. My evaluation questions, what I'll be doing research on, is to what extent does the program improve the leadership succession of this organization? Which parts of the program were the most beneficial? What do the mentees think? What was the piece of the program that helped them the most? And I also wanted to know that about the mentors. And how did the whole organization as a whole grow and develop through this mentoring program? The process of collecting data is on mostly longitudinal data to see if these people actually move up in the organization. We're using performance records from the organization, lots of survey data. We have meeting evaluation, so we're evaluating the meetings between the two the pairs of mentee and mentors. The coaches, my notes, and the coach, within the organization, we took notes whenever we were talking to anybody, and we were deciphering those notes and getting themes out of those. We will be doing in-depth interviews with mentees and mentors. We'll be evaluating those team projects that they're doing, the innovative project. And then we're just going to look at retention records as well, so more longitudinal data there. I only have initial results from the program at this point in time. We're still looking at it. Initially, the strengths of the program was the matching of the participants, the training that they received. The structure of the program was seen to have a lot of integrity, and it seems to be well liked. The other thing they liked was the ongoing evaluation process built into the system and the feedback loops of being able to get information back. And the useful identification of high potential leaders has been seen as another initial result of this program of strengths. In terms of areas for change, the managers of the mentees wanted to be more involved. Tools for mentors to help them in mentoring. They wanted more. I gave them some materials, they want more materials. And so we're developing a whole library of materials. They want more feedback on how everybody is doing. A little bit more structure to the program. And it was interesting that the mentors wanted to get together on their own to talk about how it was going, what are you doing, how are you doing it, so that they could compare notes, so to speak. So this is the program that I developed. Again, we are right now in the process of doing evaluation of this program. And I just wanted to share that with you. The transformational learning was built into it, and I'm anticipating that these leaders will stay with the organization because of this growth opportunity, and that they will provide leadership later and be able to fill those slots when all those baby boomers leave this organization. Thank you.
The last speaker is Dr. Fontaine. She'll talk about how to improve leadership through proper career management. Let's keep big one welcome to Dr. Fontaine.
Good afternoon, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today in Seoul. I was reflecting that so much has changed since I started preparing this presentation a few weeks ago. We've had a very historic presidential election in the United States today. We've also become immersed in the most global economic crisis of our time. And I think what surprised many of us is how interconnected we all are in this economic crisis. And I feel that under these circumstances, as was reflected by some of the speakers last night, that having a global forum on HR and people and leadership is even more important. I don't have to tell you that we are in very tumultuous economic times. We've probably all wondered about the leaders of the financial institutions that failed because of the subprime debacle. And we wonder, did they just not know? Or did they know and just not cater? Some leaders and their financial institutions did not fall prey to the irrational exuberance. And we wonder about them. What did they see that the others didn't see? What guided them that didn't guide the majority? What made them resist the pressures of their investors? Or what motivated them to find a better way to meet those pressures than going after the so-called easy money? And at a time when we need leaders who can see clear, who can think longer and think beyond their own walls and their own financial targets, we're also facing what has been called a talent drought. The numbers here, if you can see them, the red bars show the percentage, the change in the working age population between 1970 and 2010. And the blue bars show what that change is going to be between 2010 and 2050. As you know, as has been referenced, this has been brought about by a convergence of at least three trends. One is the retirement of the baby boomers in the US and Europe, even though they're going to stay on later because their 401ks are underwater. Also the economic boom in Asia. And the other is the globalization of business and the globalization of the talent market. We are also seeing a much harsher environment for leaders in key senior roles. You can see some of the recent statistics that show this harsh reality. I can only assume that given the current economic crisis, the demands on these roles is going to be even harsher. In fact, a recent study by the Corporate Leadership Council showed that 90% of global organizations consider succession management a top corporate priority. Yet only 20% of CEOs feel that their talent management processes can actually deliver the executive resources that are needed for the future. Strikingly, the companies that have been aggressive managing their talent have reaped both economic benefits and stability benefits. Now, we won't see positive rate of returns like this on shareholder value in 2008, I don't think. But I am certain that the shareholder returns that we see will continue to track, and perhaps track even stronger, the talent management rigor of the organizations. Just out of curiosity, I went back to the results of our last 3 years of studying the best companies for leadership development. We conduct the survey annually with CEO Magazine. And I wanted to see, were there any financial institutions who were rated in the top 20 companies for leaders? So over 3 years, there were 60 opportunities to be rated as one of the top companies. And in fact, there were only 3 financial institutions that were rated as among the best companies for developing leadership talent. One was JP Morgan Chase, one was Citigroup, and one was HSBC Holding. Now, all of these financial institutions are struggling, but all three of them are still standing. And from what I read, they're weathering the storm better than their peers. So I think that this is a testimony that leadership and talent management is important even in these times, and it has paid off for these companies. Now, others have given a much better definition of what talent management is, but it's the whole organization from the top to the bottom. But since CEO succession is so critical these days, I wanted to start with the CEO role. The main thing to know about the CEO role this day is it is changing dramatically. It is getting increasingly complex, and with consolidation and globalization, it's getting much, much bigger. I've been saying for several years now that the role of the CEO is too large for a single individual. The era of the single heroic CEO is about over. Increasingly, the CEOs that we work with us are telling us that they need to engage their entire leadership team as an interdependent, strategic decision-making body in order to run their organizations. It's simply too large for them. It also takes a very different kind of CEO to lead these organizations. We recently completed a study of the competencies required of outstanding CEOs around the globe. This was actually built on two studies we did in Asia, one of outstanding Indian CEOs and the other of outstanding Chinese CEOs. But we added looking at CEOs from other geographies. What prompted the study, we do a lot of executive assessment, and we look at what we would call generic leadership competencies. And what we found was in these assessments, when we would assess CEOs, they often did not do very well on the competencies that actually we would see in other outstanding senior executives. So we went back to a clean slate and we said, what does characterize those CEOs who are viewed as outstanding compared to their peers? And what we found was that 2/3 of the competencies we saw in the outstanding CEOs were either cognitive or conceptual. Things like being open to varying perspectives, or they were emotional, like integrity and an ego maturity. Or they were interpretive, what Patricia talked about. Their perspectives were very different. How they interpreted their perspective on their role in relationship to their varying constituencies. This is in contrast to the behavioral competencies we often see distinguishing outstanding executives at the level just below the CEO. Those are things that are more observable behavior, like drive for results or goal orientation, or takes initiative or holds people accountable. So what is needed to succeed as a CEO these days may require something very different than what you are used to looking for. And it may require different methods to assess these characteristics. What is important is you need to start by looking at the demands that your leaders are going to be facing in the future, not what the demands have been in the past. You'll need to understand the kind of roles that are needed and how the changing roles are going to change the talent profile. Only then can you really assess your current talent supply. What we're finding is that too many organizations are developing a supply of talent without seriously understanding what they're going to need for the future. And then they're surprised when they don't have the talent ready to fill the key roles. So how do you go about figuring out future talent demand? As with about everything else in this business, you have to start with strategy. And strategy is broadly, what game are you playing and where are you playing this game? And then next you have to understand what your business model is, which is essentially, how are you going to make money in this game? And then finally, you get to how are you going to organize the work in order to succeed in this business, in this game you've decided. Now what we've been looking more and more at is different operating models require different kinds of roles. We tend to think of the various roles as either going from delivery, which are straight operational roles, you have to get results, you have the resources to get the matrix roles, which you all know about and probably don't like because most people find matrix jobs very frustrating because you're accountable for outcomes, but you have no resources to deliver the outcomes. And then pure advisory roles. What we're seeing is that if you're a holding company or a conglomerate, as there are many in Korea, you have a lot of pure delivery and operational roles because you have standalone, decentralized operations. Once you start moving into shared services, you end up with more matrixed and advisory roles. And when you get into a global company that's fully integrated, you have many, many of these shared accountability and matrix roles. What it takes to succeed in each of these roles is very, very different. People who grow up in a silo of purely operational roles and they try to move later in their careers tend not to be very successful. You saw statistics about CFOs who grow up in finance, which is at best a matrix job and then is put into CEO roles. There's just a bad track record of those CEOs succeeding. So the different types of roles actually develop different characteristics. We've also begun to understand that all career paths are not created equal. We recently finished some research where we had 52 general managers and we mapped their career paths getting to this final job. And the competencies that were associated with your career paths are very interesting. The first finding was that moving quickly into stretch assignments does develop abilities like putting organizations in place and being able to select the right people into the right jobs. But moving too quickly does not develop characteristics that are going to be very important for leading in the 21st century. Things like integrity, interpersonal sensitivity, and reading the customer landscape. Likewise, we found that general managers who had careers that were mainly operational, they stayed in those jobs where they had to deliver results year after year, didn't seem to learn to assess their strengths and weaknesses very accurately. Nor did they learn as much how to walk the talk and embody strong values. And finally, what we found is those matrix jobs that everyone hates, where you have accountability for the outcome, but you have no control over the resources except some influence, that those roles tended to be positively related to almost all of the leadership competencies we studied. And they were particularly strongly enhancing general managers' self-confidence and their ability to adapt well to the organization power dynamics. So, in conclusion, I wanted to talk to you about what you can do to help you become more like those best companies for leadership, people we are calling the most admired organizations. And these are organizations that have enjoyed more and better leaders, and they tend to have a larger, more robust talent pool. We found that there are 5 things that these companies do that set them apart. So if we look quickly at each one, and I'll highlight some specific actions that you can take now. The first is they make leadership a top priority, starting with the governing body, whether that's a board, whatever the highest governing body is. That group is held accountable for developing leadership. Leadership is not seen as the responsibility of HR. HR is a facilitator. So you need to get your current leaders, like Patricia did, actively involved in developing the next generation. That's what the better companies are doing. They also invest early in leadership development. They start development early in a person's career in order to give a very broad range of experiences. We've mapped out some of those career paths that develop critical competencies, and also assignments where they work closely with more experienced executives does change their perspective on the business. Number 3 is to look for high potential early and nurture it, making it a formal process to monitor and monitoring both the process and the people to make sure you don't lose this high potential talent. And number 4, interestingly, the most admired companies who do leadership development don't invest solely on developing individuals. They've figured out that leadership teams are becoming more critical, and that working in those teams and being able to lead those teams is going to be more and more needed in this complex world. So make sure that you help and invest in the development of your leadership teams so that they can learn to be more effective. And then finally, and I think most importantly, don't get trapped by the illusion that if a person is producing great financial or commercial results, that they're great leaders. No doubt this is what happened in many of these financial institutions that have failed. It's important to look at how the person is getting the results, whether they're motivating and energizing the organizations for some greater good rather than for their own personal accomplishment. So remember that you do hold the future of your company or your organizations in your hands, that what you're doing today will help to determine whether we face another economic crisis like this one in the near future because of the kind of leaders you are developing. I would encourage you in this downturn not to retrench and retreat, and don't move to simply cutting out taking care of your leaders, developing them because it's a nice to do. Instead, really go home and examine the people programs and the processes that you have in place in your organization, and ask yourself, are you developing the kind of leaders not just that you need for the future, but that the world needs? Because we've got to remember just how interconnected we all are these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. We have the 10 minutes, so let's go to the floor. If you have any question, please do not hesitate. Even you can use in Korean. You can ask in Korean. So they're gonna wearing the translators, so you can ask in Korean issues too. So let's go to the floor.
Thank you for giving us a nice speech today, all three of you. My name is Inho. I'm working at Samsung Electronics, LCD business as a talent recruitment and retention. So I got a question to Patricia. Thank you for giving us a nice lecture about mentoring systems. Actually, our company have a mentoring system as well, and I'm an organizer for that mentoring system. Actually, we hire a lot of PhDs, and I got a question: how to motivate, or how do you have any incentive system to mentors? Because mentees, they are satisfied with our mentoring systems, but sometimes we have a hard time to motivate or giving them the incentives to mentors. Because especially in our companies, most of the mentors they have like 10 or 15 years experiences in R&D sectors, and these people are most business guy, and giving them some work as a mentor is sometimes they feel a burden. So as an HR person, can you give us some tips to motivate mentors, and do you have any examples for them?
Yes, I do. In this particular program that I told you about, number one, the management team, the top level management team, made a commitment to do this. They realized the issues that were coming up, that they were lacking leaders coming up through, that they weren't being groomed for the top positions. And so it was a concerted effort on their part, and they came together and all of them agreed. In addition, the CEO made their participation part of their annual bonuses. So that also affected it. A big part of this program, though, was that towards the end of the mentoring program, we spent a lot of time with the mentees, teaching them how to mentor. And that is, they are now serving as mentors at lower levels, but they all were very enthusiastic, the first group at least, were very enthusiastic about being mentors themselves, and they were kind of being trained as they went through the program. And again, the CEO, his plan is to build into the performance appraisal system. If you are mentoring, that counts a lot. And so I think there has to be some formal incentives to do this. And not everybody can be a mentor. And so they have other options that they can do. You know, if you work in a team environment, for instance, there, and you're a team leader or something like that, that's an incentive as well, and that counts towards your annual progress. But mentoring has been seen as a very important component, and it has to be supported by management, the top level.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to make a question to also Patricia. My name is Gary Go. I'm managing the talent search firm. When we talk about the mentoring, we often talk about the mentoring within the company. I mean, within the organization. So I'd like to know how about the mentoring from outside? Outside means the colleagues or the seniors who has worked in the same industry, who work for the same line of business. Because I think the mentee is not so open, not so frank to the mentor within the company. I mean his direct or her direct boss. So even though he has many things to discuss, they are not so honest to seek the help from his direct boss or HR person. So I'd like to know the effectiveness of the mentoring from outside. What do you think of the mentoring service of outside?
Let me see if I got your question right. Are you interested in how people from the outside view this mentoring program?
Outside mentoring.
Outside the what?
Outside mentoring from outside, out of the office, out of the company.
Okay, so you're talking about having mentors that are not within the organization doing mentoring.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Interesting enough, I developed another mentoring program for entrepreneurs, and what we did in that program was we took successful entrepreneurs and we had them mentor people that were wanting to become entrepreneurs, and that program is doing very well. And the literature on mentoring talks about it's safer to have someone that, well, number one, that you do not report to. Very often your boss can be a mentor, but it's better to have someone on the outside that it can be a trustworthy person that you can talk about the issues of I feel inadequate here, or I can't, I need more help here, and I can bring a problem to you. And so having a mentor that's outside of your area is very good. But even having a mentor outside of that area, outside of the organization, works very well too. And in this entrepreneur program, these people were learning from actual, successful business owners, how they did it, and so that worked. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's critical that the mentor is someone that is supportive, whether they're inside or outside of the organization. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Any others, please?
Thank you for this chance. This may apply not just Patricia, but maybe all the speakers. The question is, I'm also in the human capital related industry as the talent acquisition side, but when we are talking about the mentoring or even coaching, the necessity not just comes from the business line for the leadership development. There might be a bunch of issues associated with personal goals or family or emotional things like that. So even though we are trying to align the business development by growing the leaders, we focus on the strategy alignment or the goals of the company, how do you usually deal with those personal issues? Because inevitably any individual do have their own personal hot buttons or drawbacks, things like that. Are there any other implications associated with cultural background as well, like minorities or female, gender, race, things like that? Maybe complicated, but I just want to get the assessment.
I'll try. You left us to try to figure it out amongst ourselves. What we found is that having executive coaches outside the organization is particularly good for personal issues. That inside an organization, those are sometimes too sensitive things to talk about. And a lot of the executive coaches that we have in our organization really do deal with the family and the person's health and their finances, and they deal with sort of their whole life. If it gets to the point it's a clinical issue, executive coaches know executive coaching isn't therapy, and they know that you do have to hand off. I'm looking at Patricia because she's a clinician. You have to hand off to someone who is a professional at that level. I do think that for for younger people, sometimes it does help to have mentors in the organization, because in people's early careers, a lot of whether they succeed or not has to do with how they navigate the organization politics, and sometimes it's hard for people on the outside to understand what that is. But I do feel like it's very helpful as people have issues personally. They do need help and support. And it used to be a stigma, at least in the United States, to have an executive coach, and now it's very, very common and almost a symbol of having arrived.
Any consideration of cultural factors, not just age or gender?
Generally, we try to, it's sometimes hard to coach across gender and race and culture, so we try to match people up as best we can. The main thing is the person being coached has got to feel like the person coaching them really hears and understands them. If they, it's very much chemistry, and if that doesn't exist, that kind of relationship is not going to work.
And if I could just add that built into our training, this is a real important issue, especially dealing with diversity, dealing with the opposite sex, dealing with a lot of different issues, that we built that into the training. And we role-played, we talked about it, and again in the pair matching, we tried to match the best person, and sometimes that was a person that was, you know, of the other sex or of another culture, but we were looking at those issues particularly. Not all relationships work out, and we had a safety valve for that, but we did look at those issues and we talked about them, which I think is real important.
Okay, our time is up. So if you have any more questions, please contact individually. Thank you for participating in our session. Thank you very much.